Amazing. Feel bad.
Hello, welcome everyone. Thank you for joining. We're going to give it a little bit of time as we see the number going up of who's joining us today. Hello, thanks for those who are pouring in. This is that fun moment, getting to look through the names of who's with us and see the number going up and up. We're going to just give it one more minute as we see our little virtual cozy Disability Cultural Center filling up. All right, let's get started. My name is Emily Beitiks. I am very excited to serve as co-director at the San Francisco Disability Cultural Center. I'm also the interim director at the Longmore Institute, and I'm going to cover a lot of access notes before we dive in. If you'd like more personalized captions from stream text for today's program, you can access them at dcc.page/captions. You can also access them on Zoom. Today's program is a Zoom webinar, so it's a bit like you're watching a TV show with our panelists today. But if you'd like to chat further, we have a Q&A space you can use, and you can ask questions there, but also you can share reactions and comments and just be in dialogue with other guests. If you'd like to access that space after the event, you can email access@disabilityculturalcenter.org. This program is presented to you today by the San Francisco Disability Cultural Center, which is a collaboration led by the LC and Lily Cox Haven of Hope, with support from the Paul K. Longmore Institute on Disability at San Francisco State University. And that's all made possible thanks to financial contributions from the City of San Francisco's Human Service Agency's Department of Disability and Aging Services. And after name dropping a bunch of names, it's a good time to thank our access team for being part of our program today. I'd also like to express gratitude for the Care in the Academy Network and any colleagues from that project who are on today. That was an organized cluster of people working on this topic across this country, and that included myself and one of our panelists, Travis. Also want to express gratitude for the work of Leah Lakshmi Pepsina Samarasinha, whose book Care Work is so crucial to the conversation that we're going to be having today. So now on to the program. Today's event is called Care Work in the Academy, and we are going to explore ableism in higher ed, strategies for resistance and survival that disabled people are bringing as faculty, staff, and students. I'm very grateful that the three guests who came to mind for people I just know having really deeply dedicated work to creating these spaces on the inside all said yes to this program. So I would like to invite Sara Acevedo, Travis Chi Wing Lau, and Capria Berry to join me on screen. It's a tight 1-hour panel, so if you have a lot of questions for our panelists, we can't promise that we'll have any time to get to them today, but I still encourage you to write those questions. We'll be sharing them with our panelists later. We'll send resources, and we'll also be having a following conversation as a community to talk about some of the topics and the issues that we are exploring today. So first off, I want to ask you all to introduce yourself rather than have me read lengthy bios, but also don't be shy. And you have held a lot of roles inside of academia. You wear many different hats. So if you can share a little bit about these backgrounds and who you are, that would be wonderful. So let's go with Capria, then Travis, and then last but not least, Sara.
Hi, everyone. I'm Capria, they, them pronouns. I am a Black person with light skin and curly brown hair. And in a room that's like all white, all around, plain walls. And I'm excited to be here. The prompt was to talk about just share like different roles in higher ed. All right, we're pulling like double duty right now. I'm an administrator full time, and have been for many years in student affairs, so like student services side of things. I am also currently a PhD student, so balancing that too. And I'm in the classroom a little bit in my admin role. So those three things.
Thank you, Capria. Let's go to Travis.
Hi, everyone. My name is Travis Lau. My pronouns are he, him, his. I'm coming to you from Columbus, Ohio. I'm wearing a obnoxiously floral print shirt in front of very poorly organized bookcases behind me. I am an assistant professor of English at Kenyon College, which is in Central Ohio. I do health humanities, disability studies, and 18th and 19th century British literature and culture. I also am a faculty advisor for the disability student group here at Kenyon, and have done versions of that work at previous institutions, and I'll be talking about that a little bit in my remarks. But I'm so grateful to be here with really smart, brilliant panelists and part of doing DCC's event work together. I'm actually very excited. Thanks, Emily.
Sara?
Hello, everyone. My name is Sara M. Acevedo, and well, I just switched my life, I guess, my professional career, big change. I'm really happy. I was assistant professor of disability studies until not very long. And now I'm the new lead coordinator of the new Disability Cultural Center at the University of Maryland, College Park. I'm really happy. Disability culture is my life, has been my life, has saved my life. I continue to be and will continue to be a critical disability studies scholar. I'm also an applied cultural anthropologist. I was also trained in linguistics, so I mixed all of those things with disability justice principles to do my work. I'm autistic and I live with chronic illness, and those topics and issues are also at the center of my work. I don't know what else to say. Oh, yes, I do. I am wearing a tan greenish dress of which you can only see the top. And I'm wearing cat eye glasses, like also like tan color. And I'm sitting in a hotel room because I just moved to Maryland, close to DC, and I'm waiting for my apartment to be ready. So what you can see in the back is just red wall and the bedboard, which is just brown, very boring scenery behind me. And you might see my cats and service dog around. That's all.
Well, congratulations, Sara. We are very excited to see another valuable leader stepping into one of those roles, and we'll definitely want to hear a little bit about what that's looked like. Before we get to the more joyful parts of the conversation, where we're talking about the resilience and what care work looks like, I want to unfortunately ask us to kind of what is the lay of the land and really lay out what some of those barriers are in the different experiences that you've had in the past. Capria, can you start us off by talking about what it looks like inside of some of the smaller institutional settings that you were in previously?
Yes, absolutely. I like my career is kind of like I started out in really small colleges, small liberal arts college, and moved on to like kind of like a mega university, but still all private. In the experience in a small college, I joke around and say like this place just looked like it was stuck in the 1800s. And the buildings, the way I think campuses sometimes get around renovating buildings and updating them to make them more accessible is to hide behind this like historic landmark certification designation situation. for not renovating. And I think they sort of couch it in aesthetics and also, of course, the budget aspect of it. Yeah, that's what I'm thinking of right now. And also, I think in my institutional history, just folks being super, super focused on compliance and not community. And that is not how I operate as a student affairs practitioner concerned about students' well-being and holistic support.
Well, I will be excited to dive into that too. So we we hear those details. Travis, can you share a bit about some of the experiences you've had on the job market? And you're welcome to also bring in any bigger barriers as well, but like getting you to where you are today in a faculty position, what does the ableism look like that you've experienced? Oh boy, we could have done a whole hour on that question, but
Yes, and I will not punish people by telling them about just how god awful it is to be on the academic job market. So, for some context, I was very fortunate to really be on the market twice, but in both of those occasions, it was shocking to me the number of, frankly, illegal questions I was asked about disability, and I think questions that were framed as if they were questions of rigor and capacity to do work, but were in fact actually ableist questions about whether or not I should be there. And of course, I think the subtext, or maybe not even subtext, maybe it was an overtext if you want to call it that, was that my other marginalized identities were flagging me in certain ways such that they felt the right to ask those kinds of questions in the first place that they clearly did not ask some of the other applicants, some of whom I actually knew personally. So I asked whether or not that in fact happened. But I think similarly, at the actual event itself, if anyone has ever been on the academic job market, the campus visit itself is a deeply, deeply ableist exercise that could take 24 to 48 hours. You're expected to be on and present and warm and cordial. All of these forms of physical, emotional, and mental labor that is presumed to be a measure of your capacity to do this work. And I think about the ways in which the Q&A also fetishizes a particular kind of cognition that is quick and snappy and able to respond on your feet. And honestly, that was something that gave me immense fear as a graduate student. It was a trial by fire. And I'm very grateful that I ended up in a place where, in some ways, my capacity to do this work was not measured by the instantaneous responses I gave in a Q&A.
Mm. So we've heard the problem with the bare minimum compliance. We're hearing that just laws are being broken and like, and yeah, we're carving it out and it's not looking good. Sara, can you add a little bit about what the barriers are that you've seen when you're in the faculty position of publish or perish and that pressure, as well as the other ways that access needs are not met?
Absolutely. So Travis, yes, yes, yes. In all of the things you said, absolutely yes. It is really horrifying. And it just, it fuels feelings of internalized ableism. We are not above those feelings. And combined with all of the other elements of discrimination that we are faced with every day. Of course, thinking about intersectionality, it is a little too much. So when you get to that, that phase of the interview, it's just you're already spent. You're spent, and so that element of like that element of thinking that you have to be a certain way, you have to present a certain way as a neurodivergent person who's also chronically ill. It is just so many masks that you have to care not to drop at one point or another, that it just becomes a how do I even say this? I don't even know the expression in English, or can't recall, but it's just like you are sentencing yourself to carry those masks throughout your time at the institution, right? It's like if you start dropping your masks, it's gonna go very wrong, which has happened to me. So yeah, the publisher parish, you know, I think it has to do, there's a lot of comfort for institutions in proclaiming themselves to be really inclusive, right? And you know, Emily, and people who know my work know that I'm very critical of the inclusion framework just because it really puts a band-aid over so many things, right? Is what you were talking about, Capria, in terms of, oh, we're hiding behind this, you know, preservation and a budget and certification and clarification and you know, all of these elements that are, you know, at the governmental level, the local level, at all of these different levels are at the end of it excuses, justifications for. So in terms of, you know, optics and the performative element of inclusion, you know, it's this flavor of inclusionism, which is, you know, the practice of always looking at inclusion first before even thinking about justice. That is so prevalent within institutions of higher education, that is, oh, how convenient and how wonderful it is for institutions and beneficial to institutions to include. And it looks beautiful on paper, right? So, oh, it's wonderful to have a disabled autistic faculty member teaching disability studies. It's wonderful. We are so inclusive, right? But what is the nature and quality of the structure into which we are being included, right? Because there are two parts to that inclusion, the ones that include and the ones who are being included. And so in that sense, I'm always very critical of that understanding of inclusion that is very, I would say, superficial. And so is there really room for us to just exist or not exist, well, assimilated, but also for us to thrive? It has not been my experience as a faculty member, as a disabled faculty member. Once you are assimilated within a structure that was actually built without you and without you into consideration, then your experiences within it are not going to be any better, you know, versus if you were excluded from, because you are already excluded from. So when you're within it, you are exceptional. It is a matter of exceptionalism. It doesn't go any better. So, so it's really a case when we are brought into a structure which, you know, again, is not built for us. So the publisher parish is, it puts you into a competitive spirit that you cannot pursue ultimately. I deter my students, or used to all the time, from competition, and I use various forms of pedagogy, and we're going to talk about that later, I think, to do that. But it again fuels this feelings of internalized ableism. I cannot ever compete with colleagues who are publishing 5 papers a year and not even a research one institution because I am disabled. But I thought you hired me because it was so great to have a disabled professor be teaching disability studies, which actually it is. It is great to have a disabled professor teaching disability studies, right? So it's optics wonderful, structurally horrible.
Ooh, well,
Ooh.
thank you for the preaching. I know that, you know, we've been running a lot of events lately where we've invited people to just share the struggles and the rage, and like so much of what you're saying is, I know you're speaking for so many others out there who are experiencing these same hurdles. So thank you for laying that out for us. You know, before we get into talking about this idea of care work in academia, I want to make sure we think about the nuances of doing so and using care work and disability justice praxis in academia, when the language is grassroots and is created very much outside of academia. And academia has so many hurdles, as we've discovered, that are so very far from what DJ looks like. Sara, can you lay out some of those nuances for us, for people who, especially people who might be joining in higher ed and are excited to be jumping on using the language of disability justice? And you've laid it out for inclusion too, which I think is another piece of this. take it away.
That piece of inclusion, it gets me in a lot of trouble with I guess groups who think about inclusion in the moment as the only tool. And of course, we have so many fronts on which we have to fight, right? And there are so many different tactics, and we have to utilize them all. For now, we have inclusion, of course, but we also have visioning. We have to vision something else. We have to practice this living utopias, which is, you know, practicing right now what we want to see in the future, in the coming future, in the tomorrow future. And I think that this is what disability cultural centers are. We're actually practicing what we want to see everywhere else in society, in these little pockets, in these little emergent sites. Of, you know, and I talk about radical mostly not to be cool, but it comes from the word radix, right? Which is the root. It comes from the bottom up, and that's mostly what I like about it. It is bottom up, is just us. It's just the people. It's just a popular base movement, like Sense and Ballot discusses all the time. And this element of disability justice being appropriated. This is something that Sense and Ballot has discussed and has written about it. The language is so very popular, and you know, I like talking about it now in comparison to neurodiversity. I just wrote a piece with a colleague of mine, Suzanne Stolz, precisely about the cooptation of terms and how they are being used not only in academia, but just in like therapeutic or medical settings. And it's the case with disability justice. So we're practicing justice, but what is the difference really between justice and liberation and equality and equity and all of these things? These are very nuanced differences that are not taken into consideration when using these terms. So within academia, you know, disability studies is hot. It is so very hot, but it's so hot that it's being incorporated into these departments and into these programs where, no, it's not so hot, because that's not what disability studies is. And so the way that our, you know, conceptual frameworks and our theories and our practices are being used are actually counterintuitive to the work that we want to do and to the work that we actually do as activists, as scholars, as community members, as all together. So what I think and what I, you know, live by in my curriculum is when your curriculum design is informed by and inspired by and influenced by grassroots work. It is not enough to credit the work. It is not enough to say, oh, this group authored this piece and look, it is this. No, it is actually, what's important really is to utilize the tools that are within these materials and that are authored by these people to actually join in the struggle. It is not only about recognizing that it's there, that they did it, that, yeah, it's wonderful. Oh, wait, wonderful. No. So I talk to my students about, you know, critical consciousness. So I talk about examining, reflecting, and then acting, you know, on these principles. And for me, the idea of doing that is, or the not the only way, but the way is to do it is in partnership with disability justice activists and with other disabled activists working on local projects in their communities. And so in that sense, there is a real bridge between those concepts that we're discussing in the classroom, which they're also learning all kinds of concepts from critical disability studies that are not as accessible to all and are not as, you know, I don't know another word right now. Those are words and terms and concepts that I love because I'm a very abstract person, and that's the word where I thrive. I don't thrive in everyday life. That's where I thrive, right? But these are the ways where students actually get to practice with disability justice practitioners and other disabled people actually doing work on the ground. And this, I think, is the only way to really do justice to disability justice concepts. So incorporating also these principles and these principles and these ideas into their own practice. You know, I teach I used to teach mostly clinicians, pre-service professionals. And so incorporating those principles into their actual practice is what does justice to grassroots work and what it means, instead of just like glorifying it within some academic book. I hope that helps.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think I see that a lot, where some of the youngest students come to me and they've already developed and cultivated a disability justice practice. And then, the faculty are like, oh, what's that? That sounds cool. Let's start using that word. I guess that's the new word, and think that that's all there is to it, So, yeah, so thank you for carving that out for us. I want to switch into the work you all have been doing. And, I think a lot of times when we talk about care work and what this looks like, we're more comfortable talking about it in our classrooms. And so I want to put that on hold for just a second and talk first, before we get to the classrooms, about some of the ways that you all are either a part of or are witnessing these networks that are not happening in any formal institutional structure, to support disabled and other multiply marginalized students, staff, and faculty to be able to find these places of like, just hang in there, and tell us a little bit about what that looks like. So I'm gonna ask Capria first, and then Sara and Travis, and you can just go straight to each other.
My first sort of higher ed disability organizing thing happened right after graduate school. I started something that would become the Committee on Disability and Inclusion at my institution. We started like the baby version of it was a disability reading group that we started at lunchtime on the campus. And then we said, there has to be some way to bring more of us together on campus, and also to provide more of a community building space, because there was that didn't exist on that campus at the time. And so this committee started out sort of like off the record. Committees are like a very serious thing in academia, and like, to be a committee, there's all sorts of rules. And so when this started, it was started by student affairs, administrators, and students. And then later faculty were into the mix of like convening that group. But it started out with just administrators and students, and purely social. It was like, we are going to come together. We know that we're here. We have like one-off conversations, but not really like any sort of place to gather. And it started as just like venting sessions, really. And I think that space was necessary for the environment that we were in. And I know that to speak about academia and being a part of an institution, there is a type of privilege that comes with that. I want to acknowledge that. And I think I also need to say that being a part of an institution does not mean you have that institution's support. And I know, like, those are fighting words for some people, but to start this group on a campus, to say like, the reason we are carving out this space in part is because lots of our community members are experiencing this space as really hostile, uncomfortable, unsafe in some cases, and really exclusionary. Okay, so there's that. And it eventually progressed into, we had a formal structure. That structure was trying to get away from a hierarchy as much as possible. And so we had a tri-chair model. 3 people were convening this group. And I use the word convening a lot instead of leading, because that's what we were doing. And students were a part of that leadership. Eventually this sort of turned into, yes, we're doing a social piece, And also, we're asking the community what they would like for this campus to become. And working at a campus that has all these like historic buildings is sometimes really hard because it's not just the buildings. Sometimes there are people who are resistant to change. And they think things like having accommodations for students who need them is actually a compromise to the rigor of their course. Okay, like it was a common thing to encounter that a student who's coming to the committee to engage in the social activities and also get their voices heard about what we might want to present to the president on behalf of this group, which eventually happened. It is really hard to like go against that. And also, administrators on college campuses, I'm only gonna say this once, are like not as respected as faculty. Okay. I think that's not a surprise to lots of us. But when students would say, my faculty member told me this, I'm like, oh, and we were talking about earlier, like Travis, like, I'm like, oh, I'm listening to that. I'm like, that's illegal. Like, this is against all sorts of policies and codes. And, I'm holding that as a fairly new professional, being like, what do I do with this? Yeah. So I think this started out really as informal and then sort of formalized over the years. And eventually we had a president at the institution that was really willing to sit down with us, literally in a circle. Okay. We compiled all of our giant Post-it note writings into a report for that president. And she was like, I'm going to read every page of this, and then scheduled a follow-up meeting with us and actually followed through with that. And so changes really happened. And I think I'm not at one right now, but a small institution, there is something just like a little more feels attainable at a small institution, where I think others that are larger, it's just really hard to get that kind of exposure and even be in a circle, drinking tea with the president of the institution. Like, there are some places where that's totally unheard of. But I was just at a place where that could happen.
Sara? Yep, you're muted.
The famous phrase. Can you please repeat the question?
About the care work that you have seen happen outside of classrooms. So if you want to talk about what cultural centers can bring, or part of what you've seen previously.
Yeah. So outside of classrooms, I have a couple. So I'll talk about stuff that I've done with students and with a colleague again, Suzanne Stoltz. So we I designed this partnership with disabled educators, community educators, and activists and artists to pair up with students in my courses to to get them to work together and support the grassroots activists and educators and artists in completing projects that they were working on. And then one of my partners was Suzanne Stoltz, Dr. Suzanne Stoltz, and she had created this project called Anti-Ableist Teaching. And I'm part of that project before I did anything with my students. So some students were working with her, writing reviews for youth literature about disability. So they would write little snippets of, what they thought about the books, and they would publish it. And the website is public for all teachers that want to use this anti-ableist teaching resources and materials in their courses. So after this project, we decided to work together on a paper to publish it with the students. So it was 2 students and the 2 of us. that was a space that turned into a 2-year project between the 4 of us. And it became like a care workspace. It wasn't in the classroom, but it was between the 4 of us. And it was a space of, coming together, talking about frustrations, talking about disability, talking about all the things that these students went on to do because of disability studies. And these were, pre-service professionals, social work, and speech pathology that then completely rethought what they were doing and what they thought about disability and then poured it all in this paper. So the paper is going to come out soon this year. And that was a space of, care. We cared for one another. We cared for the work. We cared for the impact of disability studies on students who are going to go out and become service professionals. And, if you know about the histories of horror between disabled people and service professionals, then it is hope. There's hope there. It is so important. And then that word is going to spread out and maybe create more care networks. Who knows? We're hoping that will maybe be a model for other educators to do some sort of similar work with their students. We're hoping, who knows? That's one of the examples. There's another one. I created something called a faculty learning community. I don't know how many other universities have that, but in my previous institution, I applied for it. There's a grant for it. I got the grant. And so I created a faculty learning community called Disability Studies Grows at the University. So what I did with this was I wanted an emergent space. I wanted an insurgent space where we would think with different people from across the university about how to integrate disability studies into their curriculum. And not only curriculum, but into their programs, because we had two staff members, one from global programs and initiatives, and we have a librarian who was the liaison for the disability studies program. And then we had a graduate student from women and gender studies. And the other people were faculty from different programs. So the process was that they would apply and then they would get into the faculty community, the learning community, and we would get together and I would facilitate, and we met for like a year, blah, 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 blah. So I used Simulinton's disability knowledge and identity, claiming disability knowledge and identity, just because it is such it's a classic in disability studies, and also because it facilitated this pace of like learning one's teaching craft through a completely different lens. And so that was a space of care. That was also, because it's important to think about care not only as a space where you cuddle each other, but it's also a space where you question things, and you question things with each other. They're not, 1 minute. Okay, so the faculty learning community had really awesome outcomes. People created new syllabi, they created new projects, new classes, and all of this with disability studies materials. So it was amazing. And then we presented it, and then it was something that then we are also writing for publishing and writing specific recommendations. We wrote specific recommendations for other educators who want to create learning communities, for other faculty members to bring in other people to bring visibility to disability studies as a subject, as an agent, knowledge production, as opposed to an object of study. That's it. Sorry, long.
No sorries. That is just so perfect to follow your earlier discussion about that pressure to publish, and see you talking about how care work is part of the publishing process, and that takes time, and that's just a beautiful.
Takes so much time. Yeah.
Travis.
Emily, would you like to move forward and Kate for time, or I'm happy to offer an answer, but I wasn't sure if you wanted to move ahead a little bit.
That is up to you all. We can
Oh.
let's move to the next one, and let's have you kick it off, if that
Sure.
sounds
Okay.
Let's talk about what happens in the classroom and how that space can be a place for, even if the wider university is not there yet, if we are the leaders of the classroom, what can we be doing?
Goodness. So I feel like to answer that question substantively, I have to sort of address the ways in which I feel like my undergraduate and graduate careers were master classes in what not to do and as an instructor. It's remarkable to me now thinking about the ways in which the classrooms I inhabited were deeply hostile to me and my ways of thinking, my needs as a disabled student. And I think what we offer in the classroom is a model for something different. I was thinking of Sara's point about how so much of what we do pedagogically is about imagining better futures. And if we're not modeling that in the classroom, it honestly doesn't mean very much if it stays perpetually in this kind of theoretical space, or in some cases, this kind of vacant keyword kind of space, or people will throw out a keyword and say we're doing this thing when actually it needs to be enacted. I found that in my work as a faculty member, I'm one of very few faculty members here that teaches an explicitly disability studies course that centers primarily the work of disabled writers and scholars about disability. And it is shocking to me the ways in which those conversations are often the first place that both students and administration learn about these issues. And it occurs to me that disability studies classrooms are precisely the place where we can not only do the work of theory, which I think is really valuable, but also really live up to the disability, in my mind, disability justice, one of the most valuable lessons from disability justice, which is nothing about us without us, right? That we really need to actually do that work such that it is able to be accessible beyond the academy. And I realize that in my classroom, the moments that are most valuable, especially because so many of my classes are full of students who are not English majors, but are in fact pre-professionals, folks in pre-med and pre-law, that work of translating and making accessible the work that we do in disability studies, knowing that it will have reach in other places, that has felt more and more urgent to me as a professor of literature and disability studies. How I teach and how I model these things for students for whom this is not maybe the center of their focus, that has become particularly important to me.
Thank you so much, Travis. That reminder that it's not just you're teaching disability in the content in the readings, like that is the just the teeniest piece of it, and you've laid out such a bigger picture. Capria or Sara, does maybe one of you want to get in on that question too, of thinking about the pedagogy piece?
If Capria wants to say something, I will shut up because I've taken a lot of space. Otherwise, I can share something.
I've got just a quick point. I've been operating in like the classroom space as a student affairs administrator. And so lots of what I do in the classroom is very like dialogue skills, talking about our identities, learning a little bit of like social justice movement kind of history. And students freak out when they look at the syllabus because their participation grade, I know, touchy subject, is not based on how much airtime they have in the classroom. And this confuses them because they're like, wait, what do you mean that me speaking in class doesn't count? And I'm like, well, the way you show engagement is that you have a journal. You add to that journal every week. It could be pictures, it could be a song, it could be a video, it could be actual writing, it could be the questions that I name key questions, okay, in the syllabus, or something that someone contributed in class. And they're like, wait, so it's really open-ended. And I'm like, yes. And that also freaks them out. And so I think like even opening in addition to having like a statement in the syllabus, just very baseline that says, I recognize barriers to accommodations. They include economic barriers, identity, like all sorts of like different factors. And if there's something that I can do to help make this course more accessible to the way you learn, let me know, and I'll let you know where I can be flexible. And I think just like that alone just blows their minds, because school up until college has been teaching to the test. It has been, you are just like memorizing information and you're not thinking critically at all. And you don't have any freedom. And I think when they get to a class like mine, they're just like, oh, wait, so like I'm in charge. And I'm like, absolutely.
It's funny, what I wanted to say just went so beautifully into what you just said. Yes. So I wanted to talk about these neuroqueer pedagogies that I used in the classroom that are, thought about precisely to try to subvert these legacies of standardized education and the drive for competition that it breeds within students, right? They come to the college classroom and this is just such a huge competition that it just really really hinders my style, which is, cooperative learning out of liberatory education. That's what I try to do all the time with my classes. But before I get to do that at all, I need to really put a dent into these ideas of competition and this drive for competition. And so I really utilize this thing that I call uncertainty pedagogy. And I call uncertainty pedagogy, and I've written about this, because what I found was that in my classes, when you're teaching about disability to non-disabled people, they want a toolkit. Give me a toolkit of the things that I should not say about disability, or the words that I should not use about disability. So, and I was very resistant to that. I was very reticent to give people toolkits, because toolkits are not, they really, really are against critical thinking, right? They really get you out of critical thinking. So this uncertainty pedagogy is about learning how to live and think with contradiction. And that is something that they detest. They do not like contradiction. They do not like unstructured things. And so I did the same with participation, by the way. And I took that out of the Accessible Syllabus project, which is such an amazing tool. And I'll share in the chat. And so I use uncertainty pedagogy to get them to then have to work together to think through things in ways that really put a dent into this competition. And, the other thing that I added to that element of critical pedagogy is the ways in which, autistic embodied expression is, so counter capitalist time. It really reproduces script time in so many ways. The ways that I move, the ways that I hesitate, the ways that in which I teach are so, so, so inconvenient to the productivity effect that has really imprinted those ideas into students, that we really need to produce, get out, get the grade, go get out of classroom and go out into the world and produce. And so it's, tools that I've learned as a disabled autistic educator that actually have served in the classroom as a pedagogy of liberation, at least from neoliberal competition and capitalist drive for, productivity.
So what you all are carving out is these beautiful spaces and community building work, and it's hard work and it's uncompensated work inside of the university. So I want to talk about, a lot of times when we're advocating for this and we're teaching folks this, they're like, oh, but I'm already struggling. So how do you balance that? How do you take care of yourself? How are you making sure to also, survive and sustain this work inside of higher ed? Travis, do you want to kick us off? I know you've done a lot of mentorship.
Yeah, so I think what has been in no way shocking, but in some ways equally hard, even though I know it was inevitable, is the fact that so many disabled faculty members or faculty members of any marginalized identity end up doing this uncompensated labor for the institution in all sorts of ways, mentoring being one of them. I think about for how many students I am a quote unquote shadow advisor because they do not trust their own advisors, or that their advisors fail them in multiple ways so they don't feel safe coming to anyone else. And I've had these really, in my mind, well-meaning but also deeply frustrating conversations with colleagues who go, well, I mean, obviously they trust you. That's a good thing, right? They're coming to you, as if it were a kind of backhanded way of suggesting that they don't have to do that work. And in our conversations about this, it has always been apparent to me how ironic it is that this mentorship is valued as crucial for student success, for keeping students in school, but at the same time, it's never validated in any professional capacity. For instance, for going up for tenure, none of that is actually described as if it were legitimated as service. So this is simultaneously an expectation because I quote unquote care about students that I should do, but at the same time, I will never in any ways be recognized by the institution for it. Not to say that we should be doing it for recognition, but the idea that it is crucial and important for our jobs, yet is not recognized by that job is one of the great and profound ironies of this, of so much of what we do in higher education. I think the last thing I'll say is I'm really actually indebted to the disabled students at Kenyon who have formed a student-centered organization and have actually exceeded the faculty in terms of their community organizing. There does not yet exist a faculty group for with disabilities or even a sort of solidarity group for that. And it is really telling sort of where we are in terms of how early the conversations about disability are and that the students are miles and miles ahead. So I think with the student group as a model, I think we are in this position now as faculty to really do that kind of care work for one another, because there's actually, and many people, especially in this room and other scholars would easily attest to, there are far, far more people who are disabled but don't identify for many, many very, very real reasons in the academy. And until these spaces are made available and that we actually invest in them, especially among disabled faculty, I don't think we're going to get the support from the institution. And our students get that. Our students know and feel the hostility of these administrators, of these structures that are supposed to help them. And I think we have so much to gain in following their lead in terms of how to do collective and communal care, because it's not going to happen from the institution, at least not in any substantive way.
Thank you. That is incredible labor and such clear lessons of like the many different ways that we're not recognizing this work or not supporting it, but claiming to, as Sara talked about. Quick answers from Capria or Sara. I want to get to one final question and we've got 7 minutes left, but want to give you a chance to add to that. That question being, how do you take care of yourself? How do you take care of yourself while you're doing all this labor? No, not doing it. Okay.
I'm not the best. Sorry, this is Sara. I'm not the best. I wrote it here. I try to write something to speak to because otherwise I'll just go all over the place. I'm not the best one to answer this question just because I don't take care. I don't know how. As I don't, it's really hard as an autistic person to take care of myself. It just I don't do it.
Really appreciate that vulnerability and that honesty too, which is that like all of this stuff is we're figuring it out and it's new and sometimes it looks like that. It's like I don't know yet. I don't know yet. But
I take refuge in the work, and that's really difficult because that's my refuge, and so I take refuge in the work. And so that doesn't help me to take care of myself.
Mm-hmm. Well, I have one final one for us. And I want to make it clear, I'm not trying to be like, okay, let's end on something happy and joyful. But I have this student in mind who came to me and they're like they have a disability and were applying to grad school and they felt like every forum that they looked at just made it look so terrifying because it is so brutal out there. And we have this responsibility as mentors to make sure that our students know what they're going to encounter before they get out there. And also, we want them out there because this is how change is going to happen, to have more of these voices in there. So I would love to hear you each use your final words to just give that 1 minute pep talk, the words of encouragement, or maybe just some examples of like, it is sometimes worth it to be in higher ed. Who would like to go first? Capria, you got it.
I got a lot going on in my mind, but I put in the chat this quote from Cardi B.
Yes, please.
But I'm my own competition. I'm competing with myself. And I am lucky enough, I think, to be in a PhD cohort where that is like really true for us. Like these people in this group chat, okay, are not my competition. We're each in our own lane. And I think that it took some like deprogramming, honestly, to like not come into a program and recognize all these people in my class as my competition. And it's just like, oh, wait, we actually are interested in different things. We're all good at different things. And people are doing mic drop moments, saying something really brilliant all the time, even when we're talking about different things from different perspectives. So I'd say the competition is not everyone else out there. You are in your own lane.
Cardi B. Thank you,
Yeah.
Capria. Sara, you got one?
You and I talked about this, right? And the responsibility we have, because I feel like I would have really, and I had the most wonderful professors. I was so lucky to have amazing professors and dissertation committee. They were amazing, but I wish I would have been told how things were. So I'm just gonna steer clear from that and just gonna say I'm thankful for the people that I've met in academia, like just speaking about disability studies specifically, and the people that I've met through those circles, including you, Emily. And but I mean, we've known each other for several years now, and we've worked together several times, and so many other people that I've met through higher education. So I'm just gonna stay on that positive note and say, community is everything to me. It's what sustains me, and that, I guess, that's how I care for myself. That's the only place where I find that sort of nourishment that I don't get anywhere else, except that from my dog and my cats is out. My house is the community, is disability community, the various ones. And I have really made a lot of disability community through higher education. And I've, in that paper that was shared, I explain how through, these connections with other chronically ill, disabled, deaf, and women and non-binary faculty of color, we've sustained each other as we've been within these institutions. So I'll say that. I'll stay on that and say, you will find your people. You will find your people. If it's not within your own institution, you will connect with someone at a conference, you will connect with somebody in a working group, and you will find your people. That's what I'll say.
Thank you. Travis.
Oh goodness, I feel so much pressure now with the last word. I think I'll come back to a lesson that I feel like I am constantly trying to teach myself, because I apparently still haven't learned it yet. Crip time tells us that nothing is linear, and that each thing has its own time. And I think something that I've been trying to reiterate to my students, and I've been really reiterating to myself, is that slowness is a good thing. And sometimes the arc of progress is fucking slow. And if it is any consolation, I have a firm belief that progress is happening. I just think about how much progress has happened in disability within just five years, 10 years. But that process is slow. And no amount of us rushing that process is going to bring about the kinds of change that are truly substantive. But I really think disability has taught us to embrace slowness. And I think I'll leave with that. Let's be slow together.
Beautiful. Thank you. Thank you all so much. 1 hour was clearly not enough time. I could have talked for a lot longer, but I'm so grateful for all you shared. And I'll be sharing the Q&A report with you all so you can see all the incredible words of support that came through, as many people were having all sorts of things resonate. Thank you everybody else for joining us and being with us today and hearing this program. My colleagues are gonna pop a few links in the chat. We have a survey that will be sent out to you afterwards, and the Disability Cultural Center is still new. We're still constantly figuring out like how to make sure we're creating programs that are what folks want. So let us know how this program resonated for you. We have a bunch of upcoming events that you can see on our calendar. And we're going to paste a link to our link tree that has an option to sign up for our newsletter, see all of our events. And one event that I want to call out in particular is our Cafe Crip program, which is next Friday, September 27th at 12 p.m. Pacific time. And Cafe Crip is a gathering virtually to just talk about important topics inside of disability community. And so we chose the topic to match up with this conversation. So today we just heard from our panelists, but that will be a space where everybody gets to share and chat some more about care work and academia. So we really hope you will join us for that. There'll be some readings in advance, but it's not like class. You won't get in trouble if you don't read them. You can totally come either way. And we hope you'll be there, or some of the many other programs we have coming up. We are so grateful to be part of this community. And to all the folks out there in higher ed, hang in there, keep fighting the good fight, and take these words to heart because we have so much work to do. Thank you all.